Okay, get ready for one of the most unhinged drawing videos you've seen on my channel thus far, because this illustration was fueled almost entirely by too much caffeine and exasperation. Hello, and welcome to this holiday-themed episode of my channel. I'm Kiwikana, a freelance artist, and in this video, I'll be commiserating with anyone who's ever struggled through a piece of art. I've been wanting to do something sort of winter or holiday themed, which gave me the perfect opportunity to do a painting of my OCs Angora and Balin, who you may have seen on my channel before if you've watched some of my shorts. I'll put up their pictures here. Their world is kind of wintry and magical, so it felt appropriate to the seasonal theme. I've also been reading just like a crap ton of romantasy, manhwa, and manga, which kind of made me want to draw something a little more romantic. I don't always make drawings like this because it feels a little self-indulgent, I guess, but I feel like I do need to do it a lot more because their relationship is a prominent part of my story, and I just don't have a lot of practice drawing like this. I'm gonna kind of zoom through the sketching phase here because it's honestly the least exciting part to watch in my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments, but I made a really big mistake early on during this phase, which sort of set me up for absolute frustration and failure later on. So I think I should talk about it, and that is I did not use a reference. Yes, I know. That's terrible practice, and I do not recommend it. It made drawing this so difficult because I had nothing to go off of. I don't know why I decided to do that. I think a lot of the times when I'm drawing poses between two characters, I have a really specific idea in mind, and I can't always find the exact reference I'm looking for. Usually, if it's a single character, I can really easily take a photo of myself and use that as reference if I have that very specific pose in mind, but when it's two characters posing together, just using myself can be kind of difficult. So I thought it would be fine to just wing it, and it was not fine. I clearly haven't learned my lesson because back in college I submitted an assignment to one of my professors, and he told me that he was really shocked because it looked so much worse than my usual work. And I told him that I felt really confident in myself when I was using a reference and could really base my illustration off of that, but when I wasn't using any reference, it was like my skills totally vanished. And he looked at me like I had 3 heads and was like, why on earth would you not use a reference? Anyway, to Professor So, I am really sorry. One day I will do better, but that day is clearly not today. I powered through the sketch, although for some reason I didn't draw in the hands. I don't know what I was thinking. I was probably just totally sleep deprived when I was working on this. But after the sketch was finished, I went in and added my background, which is always my first step when starting with color. I like to know what the base color of the illustration is going to be because that's going to help inform all of my decisions later on with value and lighting and just basically what colors I'm going to pick. I went with a sort of dark but saturated blue. I had the vision of them being outside in this snowstorm, and I wanted it to look like nighttime, but also sort of moody and maybe a little romantic. The blue is also kind of similar to a royal blue, and I wanted to give them that royal energy. They're not actual royalty in my story, but for reasons that I won't get into right now, they are sort of treated like royalty. So that was all spinning around in my head when I was doing this too. Speaking of the background, you'll see here that when I add in my grayscale values, I also manually color everything in just with my default brush. I almost never use the paint bucket tool to fill in large areas with color, and that method definitely works for some people, especially if they're doing something really graphic, but for me, I like to have that background color peek through the rest of the illustration. It kind of gives this sense of harmony that you might get if you were working on something like an oil painting or an acrylic painting in real life, where you have that underpainting layer that unifies the rest of your colors. As per usual, I used gradient maps to transform grayscale to color, and I actually made another mistake here. I was really rushing to get this piece done because I had so many things to draw for the holiday season as gifts and commissions, and so I didn't spend as much time working in grayscale as I normally do. I usually like to have a pretty solid foundation before I add my color, and in this instance, I really only blocked in the lighting super roughly. That definitely made it more difficult when coloring later on because I didn't have that really solid basis for my values as I normally do. That said, I do think I did an okay job in this piece, really picking and sticking to a color scheme, which is sometimes a struggle for me. I knew I wanted to have this rich blue background and this kind of bright blue lighting, but I needed a secondary color to break things up, so I opted for a vibrant pink. Again, I think this hopefully added to that romantic atmosphere and gave an otherwise cold-feeling piece a little bit of warmth. This is actually a coloring technique that I like a lot and want to apply more in my work. It's when you have a cool light source, your shadows are going to be warmer. Or if you have a warm light source, your shadows might look cooler. This isn't always going to be the case. It's a rule because if you're standing in the sun, when you're getting this bright, warm light, you're also getting this reflected light from the sky, which is causing the shadows to be blue. So obviously the environment you're in will change what your shadow colors versus your light colors will be, but as a super general rule, it can help create more interest and depth in a piece. You just have to be cognizant of what your reflected light source would actually be. I hope that makes sense. Lighting is honestly a super complicated topic, and I'm not really an expert myself, which is why sometimes I say pink might look good here, and that's what I go with. I was also really overworking Angora's face during this process. I'm not sure exactly why I was having so much trouble with it. You'll see me go back over and paint and then repaint her face several times throughout this process. I guess sometimes you just get a particular face angle or lighting scenario that you're not as familiar with, and so it's going to take some time and practice to get it right. When that happens, I just have to strap in and tell myself it's going to be okay, even if I feel really frustrated or disappointed in myself. If I have this experience when painting, I become of two minds. On the one hand, sometimes it's good to just scrap the whole thing, especially in a scenario like this where I didn't have a good reference, so I'm kind of struggling for no reason. That said, sometimes it is good to push through because that's when you really learn. You know it's because there's a gap in your knowledge, and that means by pushing through, you're able to improve. So it's always important not to totally shy away from doing things that take you a long time or things that you don't feel confident in. I also think it's important to remind myself that I'm not going to like every drawing that I work on, and that doesn't mean I can't share it and then just move on to my next project. I also think part of my problem and my frustration from this piece honestly stemmed from the fact that it was of my OCs. I know when I work on my OCs, I get really stuck in how I want them to look and the vibe I want them to give off, and if I haven't quite gotten it, which is kind of what was happening here, if I haven't quite nailed the vision, I feel like I need to go back and revise and revise and revise until I get it right. And certainly this can be important for really, really final work, like if I was putting together a pitch packet or something. But for an illustration like this, the truth is I can just make another one. It doesn't have to be perfect. I don't have to have Valen's hair exactly the way I want it to look. I don't have to have their expressions just right for who they are as characters. I can change their designs or their outfits later on. But I think that's part of the reason why sometimes I find my OC drawings difficult. I want them to be perfect and consistent and all of these things that's just not going to happen until I get a lot more experience drawing them. So let me know if that happens to you when drawing OCs. I know I hear from a lot of people that they find it really cathartic and they really love to draw their own characters, so I'd be interested to know what other people's experiences with this are. Okay, so you can see me now once again trying to fix this face. I had gotten it to a point where I felt like it was workable, which is usually when I'm able to start actually getting into a drawing because I sort of have the confidence that I'll be able to finish it, which is why I often start with faces. But honestly, I think at this point it had been like 4 hours and I still wasn't really happy with it. I felt like there wasn't enough of that blue light hitting her face, so I tried to repaint it. And I made it look so much worse. So bad, in fact, that I'm pretty sure in a second here I go back in and just delete everything that I did. But let this serve as a reminder that it's okay to do something and realize it doesn't look good and then just remove it. It's not really a waste of time. I know it might feel like that, but you're learning what works and what doesn't, and that experimentation is really important for artists. So I try not to get too down on myself, even though during this drawing I was getting really down on myself. Yes, so there it is where I go in and realize everything looks terrible and I delete it, which honestly was a great decision because it did look terrible and I definitely like the old facial structure better. But I was just getting so frustrated at this point in the drawing. I felt like there was absolutely no salvaging it, but I had also dumped so much time into it that I felt like I had to keep going. I was still finding the process just so overwhelming, and when that happens, you should just take a break. So I went and made myself some popcorn and decided to work on some of the gifts that I would be giving out this Christmas. I was actually really happy with how these turned out, so I want to share them with you just for fun. I made this cat comic for one of my siblings of their cat Garnet based on this conversation we had and a series of photos that I took, which I thought turned out super cute and they really liked it, so that was definitely a win. I also made this little illustration of our family dog Chi-Chi for my mom. Our dog passed away about 2 weeks ago and I really wanted to have her be a part of Christmas still, so this was my way of including her. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed that little aside. I was really proud of how these turned out, so I wanted to share them even though they're kind of off topic. Also during my break, I decided that it was definitely time to address the reference situation. So I once again resorted to taking 2 photos of myself, trying to get as close to the actual pose and lighting scenarios that I was going for. It's not perfect because I don't get to see how 2 people would actually interact together in a space, but it's surely better than what I was working with, which was nothing. Also, a quick tip for taking reference pictures. I have one of those big, tall standing lamps that I can adjust where the light is coming from. I'll stick a photo of it in here. And that way I can set up my lighting source to look, it's not going to be exactly the same, but at least pretty similar to what I'm going for, so I can see where the shadows would fall and where the lighting would hit. Then I also keep a tripod or a stool or a chair or something that I can place my phone or iPad, whatever I'm taking the photo on, to get the right angle. Another thing you can get, and I was actually gifted one of them, but I always forget to charge it, is one of those colorful light bars that lets you switch between pink, blue, yellow, red light, you name it. That can help you to visualize colorful lighting scenarios. That said, you don't need anything fancy to take your own reference photos. Just overhead lighting or even window lighting can work as long as you stay consistent with where the light is coming from. Taking the reference photos definitely helped me to rework this piece. I don't think I could have finished it if I hadn't taken them, so let this serve as a lesson to always use good references. Then I started working on Valen's outfit and tried to fix his anatomy. Originally, he was meant to be wearing this fur sash, but it was getting kind of difficult to get a sense of the pose with the fur on top, so while I was working on the outfit, I just painted it out. I fully intended at this point to paint it back in, but I actually ended up leaving it painted out, so I'll talk about why I did that a little bit later. I also added his hand back in. I had honestly kind of forgotten about it until I looked back on my original sketch to help me take the reference photos. There's yet another reason I really needed my references. I just drew in the whole hand roughly and then positioned it where it needed to go, and then later I'll paint over the parts of the hand that would be behind Angora's clothing and arm. I find it a lot easier to just paint in whole sections of the body like this, even if they're going to get covered up later, because it's a lot easier for me to visualize how to draw a whole hand rather than a couple of disconnected fingers. Working on Valen's hair was actually the only satisfying part of the entire process for me. I find dark hair really meditative to work on because you really only need a few carefully placed highlights to make it read as hair. You can see that everything is kept really simple. I basically just used triangle and arrow shapes to build up the form here. Now, I wasn't loving the shape of Angora's ear, so I decided to try to paint it again. I did like that it was sort of curving back into the illustration and framing hers and Valen's faces. It definitely helped to guide the eye and establish that focal point, but it also looked really stiff and straight rather than an organic, natural shape. I kept the basic layout for the ear when painting it back in, but tried to give it more of that curve. I also made the ear fold in a little bit on itself to hopefully make it look a little more realistic. The second version certainly isn't perfect, but I definitely think it was an improvement, so I was happy with that. You will have also just seen me start to add that fur back in and then immediately change my mind and delete it. Without the fur, I have this really nice balance where about 70% of my canvas is darker in value and 30% is lighter. Right now, the eye pretty much is instantly drawn up to their faces because that's where all the light is, and it's framed pretty well by their dark clothing. Adding that fur in felt a little distracting, like it would pull focus from the rest of the illustration, which I definitely didn't want, so I just decided to leave it out. Even though I was working a little more successfully on the piece at this point, I still wasn't enjoying the process. And I want to talk more about some of the reasons for that. I think it's important that if any of you have similar struggles, you know you're not alone in them. Throughout the entire painting session, I was filled with this sense of dread that I was never going to live up to the pieces that I've made in the past, that I'm learning the wrong lessons in art, or that my work isn't improving, it's actually getting worse. I recently had the incredible opportunity to have my work shown in a gallery exhibition, which was just such a wonderful experience, but in a weird way, it also kind of shook my confidence as an artist a little bit. There was one piece of mine in particular from that show that everyone seemed to resonate with and find compelling. It was so exciting to see that kind of response to my work, but it's an older piece from January or February of this year, and I don't think I've been able to make any work that garners the same response since. I think I just have to remind myself that everyone's art journey isn't linear. There are going to be days where I feel like I'm drawing really successfully, and days, weeks, or even months where I feel like everything I make just isn't very good. At the end of the day, what separates a good artist from a great one isn't necessarily skill or natural talent or even consistency. I think instead it's tenacity. That no matter how many times you get frustrated or how many breaks you need to take, how many times you make art you're not happy with, you keep going and keep practicing. You come back the next day, week, or month and try again. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed watching this video and seeing me struggle a little bit. I'm happy I finished the illustration, even if it's not one of my favorites. I still feel like I learned a lot, and that's what's really important, right? Next week, I'll be doing a review of all of the art I've done this year and talking about what I learned and what I would do differently next year. So if you're interested in staying for that, make sure to subscribe so you get notified when that video gets uploaded. And if you enjoyed this video, maybe leave a like or a comment. I'd love to hear from you. As always, thank you so much for watching. It really does mean the world to me. Happy holidays, and I hope I'll see you in the next one.